All right. Thank you for coming. This will be our second community meeting of the year, and we're excited to continue to chat about this. Like honestly, we learn more about this program every year. Like if I've stopped learning at any point, if anything, like that's a sign for me. But in terms of, this program being what it is and how the little we really know about the brain, um, and the new things that we see every year, it's so much fun to continue to investigate the changes that we're noticing in students. And most times students are starting out on clocks, so in terms of the start of the year, we do like to do a presentation on clocks, um, and often don't do it in the first month. Well, there is orientation stuff and other tidbits that are pretty important at that time. But in terms of the first month, we haven't really, for new students, experienced the ups and downs of the area and really understood it at a much deeper level where questions start to come up. So it really is a good time to dive into some of that with some frame of reference. So thank you for watching today or joining us live. Uh, Remember, and this is something I find we need to remind ourselves of, is that Rome wasn't built in a day, right? There is a lot of expectation that like changes need to be immediate. I need to be witnessing these changes manifesting in X, Y, and Z. And within that first month or so, or even if we're into month 6 or 7, um, these changes do take time, and I will get into a bit later, but they manifest in very different ways that we might not always expect, right? So one thing, as both a someone who's been working with this program for 12 years, as well as now a parent of a student, thank you for being here. This work is tough, but it's worth it. And this can be from your future self to just think about that end goal, and like, you know, sometimes are very jubilant and like we've reached these masteries and everything's going amazing. And then that can flip on its head and it's like, this new level is so tough, or I can't get any faster. And the language can change and the emotions can change from day to day. And this work is tough. Like, we're not here saying like anyone can do this, it's easy. Like, that's not the process. You do have to put the time in, you do have to put the work in. Similar to physical exercise, like if you go to the gym, you're not going to get the results that you want after a month all the time. But it does take a little bit of time, and just remember to be patient with yourself through this process. Often when parents are going through the thought process of, what to do if there are learning challenges, right? So I've got this picture on the side. I think it's like Children Ruin Everything, the show we watch on CTV in Canada. I don't really watch the show, but we're between shows right now, so we're like, oh, let's try something new. And I'm on my phone trying to search out the fantasy football players I need to pick up for the week, and my wife's kind of watching and doing something else, and I noticed that they're talking about learning disability and medication, and these big questions like, do we talk to the kids about it? What are our options here? Do we even name it? There's so many processes going through, the thought process going through this decision to be able to start something like this, to start a program like this. What are our options? Like, do we go medication? Do we pull out of this school and try a different school? Are the friendships groups actually pulling our kid down, and we need to move our whole family to a different location so we can access this other school that might be better? Like, how do we know this will work with our kid if we found something? Like, I don't have a crystal ball. Like, is that, are we going to be non-responders? Are we going to pick up on this? These are very normal types of things that parents go through in making these decisions, right? Who can I trust? And the issue is, a lot of the times, because the brain is so complex and because systems are set up the way that they are through the educational system, through academia, to get people into places of power and knowledge, where they aren't in a position to really understand everything that's out there. So we can find this person that we really trust, but they don't really know about cognitive rehabilitation. And the first step is down at this bottom, should we medicate? Like, medication is your option, getting extra support at school is your option. But is that really the best advice? So I really do advocate for, reading research, figuring out what works, trying new things, because sometimes some extra tutoring's not always going to help. Like, big repercussions. We're taking everything away. No more TV, games, toys, tablets, phones. Like, is that the best choice? Is that actually creating trust? Right. So, like, there's not one magic pill that works for everything. And that's not what I'm recommending with working on this activity and clocks and Aerosmith in general. But it just shows the complexity of these decisions. And really, like, if I scan back, like, Rome wasn't built in a day. Be patient with the process, because we do know that sometimes changes do come up in many different ways, and we need to be patient for that in different types of systems. But it's interesting to think that, like, if we're just pushing towards medication, we're just pushing towards extra support, there is more out there. And I know as this is the community, so you guys have made that decision to work through this program and trust the process. We've seen amazing things, and I'll share some information about that too. So we haven't really dived into the origin of clocks in the program within a few years, I think. So people watching this that may be in their third or fourth year on different activities, we might not have really dealt with this. So I wanted to give, based on a request from a parent as well, like, how did this come about? Where did clocks come from? So Barbara Aerosmith Young, pictured here, she's a Canadian woman. She's from Toronto, lives in Toronto, has a school there, Aerosmith program. It's a smaller school. They really do a lot of research out of that center, a lot of best practices. And essentially, when she was younger, she was struggling in school. It was very difficult for her, but she was extremely intelligent. So her intelligence side knew that I can understand these things at a much deeper level, but I don't know what's going on with these things over here. This is foreign to me. I can't picture what these mean. And I believe when she was younger, a teacher told her parents, like, she has a mental block. And for her brain, that was picking up, I have a wooden block stuck in my head that's preventing me from learning. Because it was the literal translation of that, because that figurative comparative language just wasn't something that was sinking into her learning style at the time. So as she got older, she started to do some more research and learn about neuroplasticity, learning about how the brain works and networking through a lot of different research, such as at UCLA with Dr. Rosenzweig, who was researching the brains of mice and putting them in enriched environments versus poor environments, and seeing how the structuring of the brains change. So we knew that she knew, based on that the environment that someone is in can influence their brain positively or negatively, right? What she started to do was also research Dr. Loria out of Europe, who was looking at the people that had survived brain injuries from the World War II. And there was one person who had a metal rod that was stuck through their head and survived. And he noticed that he could no longer tell time. He could no longer understand cause and effect or reason. So there was things based on where this rod had gone through that were affecting certain types of cognition. For her growing up, she knew, like, okay, well, the brain can change based on the research with Rosenzweig. And there's certain regions that are capable in doing tasks of a certain type based on my research of Loria. So she started making, like, she knew I've never been able to read a clock. I don't know how to read a clock. I don't know what that means. And in life, I have trouble organizing myself, organizing details, understanding time, understanding cause and effect as well, just like this guy who was fine and then had this injury. So she started making flashcards of clocks, reading these flashcards. And she was noticing that she was going from like a one hand where it was like just a minute up to a two hand. And it was quite a slow process, but she was noticing that as she was moving up, she was getting faster and faster through these flashcards. She moved up to 3 hands, 4 hand clocks. And she was noticing at that point that there was changes manifesting in her life based on things she couldn't do before that she associated with that part of her brain. So when we're looking at our clocks, and she created the program based off of that knowledge that I am seeing differences in myself. What else can I do? So she researched these other areas, figured out different relationships between parts of the brain and what their roles were. And she was really able to create a system that treated people for learning challenges or learning disabilities in a very holistic way by stimulating the area of the brain that is involved in specific tasks. So when we're looking at this today and we're looking at, okay, what's our starting point here? And why are we often starting with clocks, right? So when we're looking at executive function versus non-executive function, executive function changes the way we understand and communicate with the world around us, right? We have handwriting activities. We've got reading focused activities. In terms of what you're getting with those is awesome outcomes in those areas. With executive function, it is changing how you're understanding the world, how quickly you're able to communicate with them, how you're problem solving, how you're organizing yourself. So we really do like to start with that networking, because what we've seen, especially going from mostly in person, where students are doing 4 to 6 activities at a time, they're really hitting all of these areas. They're working on their penmanship and their organization of their speech. They're working on a number of different areas at the same time as they're working on symbol relations or symbolic thinking, which is the left brain, nonverbal thinking, which is the right brain, kind of in a bigger package. Being online, we have to triage because most of our students are doing 1 or 2 activities. So we have to make sure at this time, based on you staying in your current system, we need to ensure that we are hitting something that's going to have the most impact for you in your everyday life. So by starting with clocks, we do see that connection between the right and the left brain here, going right to left. The other activities are more targeted to the regions. Predicative speech helps with our working memory, going back and forth. But we see improvements across the board in other activities once clocks has really been worked on, because the brain's in a better place to communicate from left to right within the use of clocks that helps promote all the other areas. So clocks helps with the 2 hemispheres of the brain, the right and the left, to help them communicate and see the world and react to information much faster. So an example that I really like to give out is the direct flight, right? So if we're going, our main area is Vancouver, where school's based out of. I live just north of Toronto. If I wanted to get back to Vancouver, the fastest way is just to drive down to Toronto, hop on a plane, and then get across the country in a 4 to 5 hour flight, right? So if my brain is communicating information quickly like that, it knows the efficient route. This is where I drive. This is where I fly. This is how I get information from one side of my brain to the other, right? If my brain was learning a bit differently, not problem solving in the same ways, reinventing the wheel with every problem that I see, it might look like me, okay, I got to drive to the airport, but now I got to get on a flight, and the flight's going to go down to Hamilton, Ontario, up to Winnipeg, Manitoba, across to Calgary, Alberta, down into Abbotsford, BC, and then I've got to take a bus over to Vancouver from there, right? I'm still getting from A to B, but the amount of time and energy it took me to get to that, I might not take the flight next time. I might just try to, phone in for the meeting that I'm flying across for example, because I'm going to want to avoid those situations. And now if our brain's doing that, a billion times a day, that adds up to being quite a bit more information, more electrical activity going from right to left. The brain doesn't have consistency on how it's learning, and that can lead to the corpus callosum not working as efficiently as it should and transmitting the information across. My amygdala at that point might pop in, my fight or flight system, because my brain is so overworked that my fight or flight system comes in to help me get out of situations, argue my way out of situations, or just freeze up and not know what to do with overwhelm of information. And research has shown that when the area is working as it should for the age of the student, that there was less noise within the frontal lobe, which help with focus and stamina, and equaling less likelihood for fight or flight response to kick in. So as the energy comes down, my brain starts to understand that network better, which is what clocks helps to connect. So you're problem solving with all the appropriate information from right to left with less stimuli getting in the way, which is resulting in fight or flight systems not popping in as frequently. So when the frontal lobes are working calmly and efficiently, they're global improvements that can set the brain up for future improvements at a higher level. So looking at clocks, so looking at symbol relations, these are some improvements that we would typically see. So processing concepts at a higher level, understanding and grasping what we read and hear, gaining more insight, having better logical reasoning, seeing connections between different ideas, analyzing abstract concepts, understanding cause and effect, flexibility of thought at a much higher level, accepting and processing other viewpoints. So different things in terms of your flexibility, not being as rigid with this is how I understand the world, so this is how it needs to be. So by accepting other viewpoints and taking those in, like, oh, I could think about this differently. Fight or flight comes in, that really can't happen. Making more rational decisions because of that whole process, better critical thinking, improved memory, improved attention. So these are things that we see improve just based on activity within clocks, right? So if we are improving in all of these, and I'm not saying everyone improves on all of these at exactly 3 months, and if you're not improved in all, like everyone is so different, the brain is so different in how it works. You might see improvements in some of these, you might see improvements like, just because you came here for I'm going to improve in X, Y, and Z, like, whoa, W is really showing up as an improvement. I didn't really know that was even that low, but that's the thing for my child that's really standing out, right? So these are a lot of the things that you should be looking for as a parent or as a student with us. And it can take some time for these to really refine themselves, but the brain is becoming in a better place to learn and to understand and process information because of a decrease in activity within the frontal lobes, which is allowing students to calmly maneuver multiple relationships, which is why this is called symbol relations. It's the relationships between different symbols happening at once and understanding how they relate to each other. But how can this tool really help, right? So one question I get often is like, yeah, but they're reading clocks, so like they should get faster at clocks. And it's like, yeah, absolutely, right? There's no question that reading multiple clocks a day, reading thousands of clocks over your program is going to help you read clocks faster, right? Just like the same way as navigating the gym. If you're going there consistently, you know which machines you like, you know which weights you like to use, right? And you kind of stick with those and you start to see the outcomes and you get in a fluid response. So when someone else comes in, you can explain to them how to use the machines, right? The same way a student should be able to explain how to read a clock after a certain amount of time. But that's not the point of the activity. The point of the activity is the outcome that reading the clock can create. So a way that I like to explain how the brain is reading this in this situation would be the right and the left brain work through the corpus callosum. So if you took your brain out of your skull, it would fall apart into two big pieces connected by the corpus callosum from right to left, right? So the right side of our brain is more nonverbal, more reading people, emotions, situations, understanding how you're feeling, understanding how others are feeling. It's more of the art and music side of the brain, a lot of association in that side. The left side of our brain reads more numbers, information, processing of information, problem solving, taking a lot of information and making sense of how it all means to one thing. So you need both of these areas of the brain. You need the humanistic understanding and visual perception side of the brain also matching up with the logical, organized, detail management side of the brain. So the right side would more read the symbols like the circle and the lines on the clock, and the hands on the clock, whereas the left brain reads more the numbers, the organization space between the numbers, and how the numbers relate back to the clock. So as you're working through this system, as you're reading 5:30, 1:10, 8:02, 3:24, 6:37, 12:08. As you're reading through that process, I'm actually recruiting both sides of my brain in that process, right? As I'm watching my teacher give a lecture, I'm taking in all of this information from every angle to put it together to make meaning, right? As I'm reading these clocks, I'm reading all the situation to put it together, these lines and circles, because really that's all it is, line circles with some numbers splattered around, right? To make sense of what that means to tell an exact time. Now, doing that multiple times, your brain starts to realize like, oh, okay, this is this is what a 8:02 looks like, right? So, okay, I know that process. And as we're starting to refine these, you're creating that connection from right to left. That's becoming your default network as you're using this, right? That network then begins to grow and manifest and strengthen. And your brain starts to realize, like, hey, this is actually the fastest way to get this information from one side to the other. Why am I wasting so much energy on these other tasks? And it uses this pathway. Says this highway is the fastest highway. I'm not going to take the back road. I'm not going to take the other street that connects to here because it might be faster, might be slower. It's like, this is the way that I'm going to be doing this. And it's all very subconscious. As you're moving through 2 hands, you'd go up to 3 hands once that gets easy. Novelty within in the brain actually, and the ability to recognize patterns at a very high pace ends up reducing the energy that we're using to visualize and complete tasks. So if I'm learning how to drive a car, from the time you get your permit to learning all of those small steps that are ingrained within driving a car, to then being able to drive a year later, you're not putting all of that same energy that you were putting in on day 1 that you're putting in on day 365. Right? Your brain has processed, it's understood how this task works. It's not putting that energy in. So think about school being like every day for my child or myself going through school or difficult work tasks, or like day 1 of driving the car. Your brain's going to burn out. The brain has to learn the patterns. And as it learns patterns, we don't put as much energy to a task, and we're able to do other things and take on more and complete different tasks at the same time, bring in more information and do things without thinking about it. So any task that we do, such as riding a bike even, it's going to take less energy over time of practice. So as we're establishing this network, because we know where in the brain it hits, we're getting faster at adding more symbols in. And we go to a 4 hand and a 6 hand and a 8 hand and a 10 hand. Not everyone needs to go up that high, and that's not the goal for all students. It's really to maintain 4 hours per week, because that's what we see in research really paying off within that system. But that is the process that we're going through. It does take time. It does take a lot of clocks to read. It does take a lot of reasoning on the sub levels to really understand those hands. However, it does pay off in the fact that, you're recognizing these patterns faster, and that's establishing a new network from right to left. Of course, we track progress. We will be sending home an advisor report at the end of every month. So this week for September, if you're watching this within the timing that we're recording it, you will be getting an advisor report with data at the end of this week from the month of September. These summer months, we hadn't sent them out for students that started with us in the summer. This will be something new. And for new students, this will obviously be something new as well. There will be a link to meet with your advisor if you do have questions about the information. And there will also be the chance to email back and forth with your teacher if you have any questions about the day-to-day with this. But we're looking at the engagement goal. We have a standard based on those 4 hours per week that we are trying to get in for each activity. And that's kind of what we're aiming for within the goals that we set. The goals change regularly based on where the student is. And we're working up to our mastery criteria to be able to move from one stage to the next. So there is some new research that just came out that I wanted to share, and this will be available. I can send links if upon request. It's just kind of being consolidated a bit more as well. So there's a whole cohort in Spain that was looking at what does it look like when an entire class is doing Aerosmith at the same time. And a lot of parents within the first like tours that they might have with me do ask this, like, why isn't this in all schools? Why aren't like this makes logical sense? Why aren't all students starting out with certain activities? And Barbara Aerosmith had the same question, and the school in Spain wanted to investigate this. So they had students doing symbol relations program as well as there was a separate study that's connected on the motor symbol sequencing program for younger students. But starting in grade 3, they had all students within this program doing 40 minutes a day for 3 months. And they saw gains in reasoning and fluid intelligence and visual spatial ability, attention, planning, processing speed, and cognitive flexibility. So these were things that I pointed out at the start of the presentation where we are seeing improvements within our students and what's being reported back to us. So this isn't too much of a shock that we're seeing this movement. So studies completed in schools where the whole class was engaging in Aerosmith, assessment showed improvements in these areas. Now, the interesting thing was when they compared one class that was doing the activity to a separate class. So they had 41 students doing symbol relations in a day, and then they had a control group of 42 students just doing their normal curriculum. And this is just over a 3-month period. So if we're looking at attention, which is a big thing with children with learning difficulties, keeping attention on a task, keeping focused on a task completion, because attention doesn't just mean you're paying attention and you're focused on it, and that means you're bringing the information in. Attention means you're hitting all the variables, you're understanding how everything works together. There's a lot of things that are involved in that. So if we're looking at this group, at this Aerosmith, which is the lighter green mark versus the control, which is the darker green students in their ability to attend within these assessments that they were working on. So those Wisconsin card testing, response inhibition, and selective attention, concentration, processing speed, and endurance. So concentration endurance tests that they were doing within these 3 measures. The control group, there's a slight increase there. It's not exactly level, but they are moving up, which you would hope that they would be, being in school, that you see some improvement in their ability to attend. But if you're looking at the Aerosmith group underneath, that's a huge jump. They jumped from being quite a bit under within this, which might have meant this group was potentially a big pocket of students that really could use the Aerosmith program that they put in. So they started quite a bit lower, but they ended up after 3 months quite a bit higher, right? So this is showing that, kind of answering that question that I get often is like, why isn't this in school? Like, it should be. All students, in my opinion, I'm quite biased because I've been in this program for 12 years and I've seen a lot of amazing changes with students, which I hope you're all witnessing or starting to witness at this point. But we are seeing when a whole group is working through this model, we're seeing improvements across the board. And I'm looking forward to reading the full published study as this information is just starting to come out. And hopefully this starts to push Aerosmith into schools everywhere as time goes on. If anyone's heard me speak in the past, I'm very passionate about neuroscience and education being more of emerging fields, whereas right now they're kind of separate in the way school is set up and organized and tested isn't really based on how the brain learns and grows, which is a change I would like to see. And I think this would be a great way to start is adding at least clocks into the regular day of students. So with these results, it never surprises me, but always delights me to get emails like this from parents. So I received this email yesterday or a couple of days ago, just this week, from a parent that just got some more testing done. Hello, Josh, we met with our son's teachers tonight and they shared his most recent CAP4 assessment scores. So verbal reasoning 89, quantitative reasoning 94, nonverbal reasoning 97, spatial reasoning 91. So this means that the mean scores improved from 80 to 93 between June and September. So this student was working on symbol relations. He also added in symbolic thinking, working on the organization of details within the left hemisphere for the summertime during this period. So I emailed back and asked like, hey, I'm doing a presentation on clocks this week. Do you mind if I share some of this data? And they were happy to share, but also gave me the starting point at that point. So it went from 82 to 89 verbal reasoning, 82 to 94 in quantitative reasoning, 71 to 97 in nonverbal reasoning, 83 to 91 in spatial reasoning, with a total of from 80 to 93, 100 being the average, right? So this student has moved from, in a very short period of time, a considerable amount, and they're seeing it start to really pay off in his everyday life and education as well. So we love seeing emails like this. If you're seeing data come through, please send it our way. We'll never share anything without your permission. But it's great to be able to, put some proof to the hard work that they're putting in. And often, this doesn't come easy. This process was not simple, and getting to this point does take a lot of work. But these are the types of results that we like to see, and this really matches back to what we're seeing along this group. So this year, starting in July, I put my son's 7. So these are some things that I've learned having my own kid in the Aerosmith program. Okay, so I've really found that it's worth the fight, especially in that first month as we were getting some of these systems down, how it was unfair that he was having to do school in the summer when none of his friends had to do school in the summer. My son is quite an argumentative type of child. He will sit and know that he's not working, knowing that he's not working, knowing that he's not working, just to kind of prove that point. And that first month was tough, right? Like just based on his personality type. And that doesn't have to happen for everyone. But it was worth the fight. And we tried not to fight. And we tried to be calm. And a lot of these kind of work together, right? We tried to, reason and figure things out just to make it work. My wife and I really balanced the system together. It was, from my position, knowing as much as I do about our program too, it kind of made it harder. Because often, like if I'm looking at number 5 down here, your own childhood experience has become a factor. I was diagnosed with ADD when I was 16. I know what that life is like, of having trouble with focus and attention. And sometimes that comes back in, and you think about like how I was raised and what it would have looked like if I was doing this program at this time. And like a lot of these things come up, and that's totally normal. And I think it's kind of good parenting to relate back and be vulnerable with this. Outcomes come in different shapes and sizes. So we had a goal of, okay, we want his regulation. Like the big thing that we were focusing on was, okay, we want regulation and his ability to maintain control through frustrating situations, to not bring him to that fight or flight, which is a much as a 7-year-old, like I'm not overly concerned about his scholastic scores. And it's like, it's not even that big of an issue for us, but that was the main reason why it came. Whereas some people would come like, I need to get these scores up. We need to get into this other school. For our situation at this time, that wasn't our main focus. It was more controlling the overreaction in some situations where it just wasn't necessary. However, last night we had parent-teacher interviews conference. Then we had rush home for swimming lessons. And then as soon as we got home, we had to eat quickly because my wife had to go to the school council meeting. So it was just a chaotic night. And so I put our youngest to bed. My oldest was hoping, I wanted to watch this show. Can I watch this show? Or can you play Lego with me? And I can't. I really have to finish up this cleaning. But let me get this done and then I'll spend some time with you. Okay, so we brought some Lego upstairs, sat down on the carpet, and asked like, hey, can I put this movie on? Like, no TV at this time. And normally that would have been like, why? Like, he would be getting all upset. 1 minute later, he kind of came up to me, said, Dad, I really wanted to watch this Percy Jackson quickly because I wanted to build him with Lego and I'm not sure what he looks like. So can I watch it for 5 minutes just to see what he looks like, so that I can build him with my Lego? And that reaction was like, I did not expect this kind of outcome at this point, but the ability to like, I'm not getting what I want, but I need to organize a way to be able to get it in a fair manner without it seeming like an unfair situation, Sure enough, 5 minutes later, he turned it off. He started building. I finished what I had to do, and we were building Lego together. Where normally in the past, maybe not normally, but occasionally in the past, that would become somewhat of a fight, especially after that much chaos of things that we had to do in a certain order. And starting to see some of those smaller changes come up are really making a big difference in my situation. The don't give up and keep them accountable. Keeping them accountable is a big one. Being online at home, you can figure out ways to get away from the teacher's expectations at time, or you can manipulate. And that's actually a good thing. You want to be seeing a little bit of the students advocating for what their needs are, even if their needs aren't an adult level. So keeping them accountable. So we'd have times when, okay, well, we didn't finish our goal in the morning, and that's when we're doing our clock. So after school, that's the first thing you do. You need to get up to that goal. And that took quite a bit of fight, which was worth it, because now he's just able to log in and do his work on his own. But I don't feel like that would have been the situation if we kept bending every time that he wanted to bend. And we had to stay firm with that and keep them accountable for it. With clocks, like, you have access outside of the teacher time. So in terms of getting to that goal, the screen will show you when you log in how many sets you've done, if you've been able to reach that goal yet. So as a parent, even if you don't have all the tablet, you don't have all the data like I do for myself, you can access that through logging into their profile to see if they've gotten that goal. And I think keeping my son accountable for getting that work done every day was one of the things that led him to where he's gotten in just a few months. And this was a big one. So start to recognize fight, flight, freeze in both your child and yourself. You can see it coming within your kids, and you can often recognize that, but then turning that table back, like, is this working me up? Is their inability to focus through exactly what I need them to do actually putting me into a fight or flight situation? Am I the best person to be dealing, or do I need to change how I'm working with this? Do I need to walk away for a minute and come back and really look at that? Rome wasn't built in a day. This is just one day of many where we're going to get through. And today's not one of the easy days, and that's fine. And how am I going to deal with this situation? Right. So as a parent, regulating yourself through that process and not needing that end goal right away, because that's where it can kind of come to, especially with parents with anxiety issues. For example, like, what's this going to mean if he's not getting to this goal today? What does that mean for his future? And like, we can't separate from that, right? And like, looking at big picture and really getting back to everything's going to be okay. We just need to sort this out, and really being that emotional support for them, which they might need through that process, while also being firm and keeping them accountable. So I touched on number 5 a little bit, childhood experiences, and even that fight or flight system, and recognizing that. If you're starting to recognize that, and you're seeing when things get difficult, how do I act, right? Or what are they doing? Or what trends can I see where, like, okay, well, after our third set, we need to run around the house, right? I need to get some physical movement in them, because that's the time when I start to see that attention wavering, and some of those strategies of, I need to go to the bathroom, or I'm hungry, or I need to ask a million questions about something totally unrelated that I know you're going to want to talk about because you have interest in that, right? There's a lot of things that can come in that moment. We're starting to recognize that, and a lot of that we can relate to our own childhood experiences. So there's time to look big picture and time to be in the moment. Often when you're working with your child, being in the moment and supporting as best as you can is the best solution. That's why they have their teacher. Their teacher is great with motivating, great with strategies, great with little tricks that they can work on. And that's awesome. In terms of the communication with your advisor, like, let that be separate from your child. And if you're a student, let that be separate from your time with us. So with your teacher, what's going on in the moment? How do I get through day to day? With your advisor, look at the big picture at that time. Very separate things to do, but very important to be separate. It's really okay to be vulnerable. And this, again, can be for a parent or a child. I know that times that I've brought up like things that were difficult for me that I did not expect a really type of reaction from them, really took me back a bit. And this was with working with students as well as my own child. But it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to talk about things that were difficult for you. This is where some of those childhood experiences can come up, where it's okay to go on that tangent sometimes if you see that it's helping them understand themselves and you better and creating a better relationship. Because we do often hear that relationships do improve quite a bit based on students working through clocks, just parent and child relationships, because of that understanding and the vulnerableness that can come up within this situation. The amount of times I've had 6 foot plus men, dads crying, talking about the progress that they've made in this, and seeing that and that vulnerability come up. It's amazing to see how that can transform the dynamic of families. So don't be afraid of the vulnerability. And overall, like, create the best environment for them to work based on their needs. I know that that can change from time to time. I would never recommend not having like a desk spot where you're at the same height as your table, you're looking perfectly across to ease the pressure off of your neck. Like, those are great things to do. Have your typing pad perfectly, but sometimes you just need to get through the work, right? So if we can get to that point, and that's our end goal, like, okay, you can work in your room in this way that we normally wouldn't recommend for a bit, or we can change up how we're working on this to just be able to get some of the dosage in and get some clocks read, because the clocks are what doing it, not exactly where they're sitting or how they're sitting. But this can be changed in some situations of like, make sure that no one else is watching TV in the room, right? Make sure that they're not watching YouTube unless it's like some type of music that they can't see a visual and it's able to help them focus. Maybe not podcasts that they're listening to that they're very interested in Minecraft and listening at it, like that might be stimulating the brain away from the activity. So there are some things in terms of a noisy breakfast table that you're having them work around while everyone else is there, where the focus really is deviated. So there are some environmental changes that you can influence to create a quiet workspace that's a positive atmosphere for them. Whereas sometimes you can bend the rules slightly in terms of being able to ensure that they're getting that tool in while communicating with the teacher to be able to come back. And the same thing as, like, I often get the question for students coming to us that are on attention medication, right? So, like, should we take them off of the attention medication because they're in this program? Like, not exactly. Like, work with your doctor, for one, because we're not medical professionals. For two, like, what you can start to do is like, okay, if you need engagement to be able to get the outcomes that you want, and the engagement needs to be up here, and the medication is allowing you to be around here. So now as the improvements are coming, it's kind of matched. Once it's at that point, now work with your doctors to see if you can reduce the need for the medication. And that's helping to create a good environment for them. It's helping to get away from something you might not want to be putting, a foreign substance, into the equation. But all of that process is just a way to improve the engagement, because engagement promotes neurological change by working like an exercise. Also, use your resources and ask for help. So a lot of the times when students will come in, say you register on the 16th of a month and you're starting the next month, like, things you can work on is working through like the 5, 10, 15, 20. So these are things for your child, if they're on two hands, that they should know these multiples of fives along and where they land. And then use your resources for your drawing and equal lengths levels. Teachers have all of this. They can send lots of resources to you. It's not a one size fits all. It's not like these two images that I have here, what everyone uses. Some students, like, this would be kind of difficult to read because the numbers are on the outside and you don't see that on the clock. So it actually creates more of a difficulty, whereas others, this works perfectly for them, right? But everyone's very different, and teachers will be able to read which types of resources will be best for you. So thank you for watching or joining us live. Our next meeting will be on Wednesday, November 1st, and we hope to see you then.